Hello.
Hi.
Hi, Alan. You can hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly. How are you?
Good, good. Nice to meet you.
It's nice to meet you too. How are you?
Okay, great, thanks. Nice room you got there.
Oh,
I like
thank you.
it.
I can see your guitars and everything behind
Yeah, quite a few there.
you. Oh, wow. So tell me a little bit about yourself.
Okay, I live in Edinburgh, just in Scotland, and I live just outside Edinburgh, the capital. I lived here for about 40 years, but traveled quite a lot in my life. And I no longer work for a living. I just play around making music and learning stuff, learning stuff about music, really. I mean, I'm learning to read music and write music, composing and so on in my old age. That's the current interest in a way.
Oh, okay. So forgive me for asking.
Yeah,
You don't you play, but you can't read the music?
that's right. Yeah. I've been playing for, I don't know, 50 years or more. But I only learned to read music in the last 3 or 4 years.
Okay. So then you play by ear?
Played by ear, yeah. I know enough music theory to play guitar
Okay.
and to write songs, but I couldn't write it down before, and I couldn't read it except very, very slowly and painfully. Now I can read it slightly more quickly and slightly less painfully. But it's still quite hard.
So do you just play guitar then?
I play guitar, bass, mandolin, keyboards, and a little bit of percussion.
Okay. So you're multi-instrumental.
I can
Um,
bluff my way on some instruments, yeah.
um, so I read a little bit in your biography. You've been songwriting since you were 16 years old.
Yeah, yeah.
What got you interested in music?
Um, my my parents used to my parents had a few albums of music shows, but they didn't have hundreds of albums. So they had the same, like 4 or 5 albums, and they would tend to put those on quite often. So by the time I was 6 or 7, I kind of knew these things pretty well. They would include Rodgers and Hammerstein musicals like South Pacific and The King and I, and quite a lot of Robert Burns songs. Um, so I kind of grew up with that stuff around. Also, they were members of a church that had a good social community, and that included a dramatic club who would put on plays and sometimes musical performances. So I got used to seeing my mum and dad singing or doing musical thing, being involved in musical productions. So I guess it was kind of inevitable in a way.
Um, so what what's kind of your inspiration behind the music? Did you have any role models or anything growing up?
Um, I think when I heard those musicals, I loved it and enjoyed it, but I never thought about doing it. But then when I heard the Beatles and the Stones, remember this is when they first came out. I was 9 when the Beatles kind of hit the big time, and it was so exciting. It just had if you heard it on the radio, the radio would be on and there'd all be this stuff kind of chundering along, and suddenly the Beatles would come on, and there was this just rush of energy. And so I started watching them on TV and watching the groups that came up with them and thinking, I'd like to do that. but never really. I didn't have a guitar. My mum and dad one time got a Chinese meal, and with the Chinese meal came a pair of chopsticks. And I'd sit watching the TV, watching the Beatles on, and banging away on a chair with the chopsticks. So these clouds of dust would come up. My mother would stop me. And then eventually, about maybe 14 or 15, I got a guitar, and that was a godsend for a boy who was not into sport at school and therefore was not really that socially acceptable. But once you got a guitar, you were more socially acceptable. The Pete Townsend story, exactly. Sort of a gawky boy with big nose gets guitar and suddenly has a circle of friends. And the inspiration then would probably be Paul Simon and Garfunkel and so on. And I think the Moody Blues and the Beatles, it was quite kind of safe stuff. It was the sort of music that you could almost convince your parents to like.
Yeah.
And that went along for maybe a year, maybe the first 6 months or so on that I was learning guitar. That's really all I was trying to do. Then I was introduced by friends to some much more out of the way stuff. On one hand, on the folk side, a group called the Incredible String Band, who were from Edinburgh, and they were wildly weird. In terms of one verse of a song might sound like it was Indian, and the next verse would be boogaloo piano, and the next verse was something else. Sometimes in a single couplet, they would change the musical style. It was completely off the scale. That was on one hand. On the other hand would be King Crimson and the sort of very intense metal stuff. I had very good friends. They introduced me to a lot of weird stuff. So that kind of gave me quite a broad canvas to try and, or a broad range of influences to try and manage. So anyway, one time, and I think it was about 16, the school sent a bunch of us to France. It was my first time away from home. We got 2 weeks in France, and then in schools in France, and then a bunch of French kids joined us, and we got 2 weeks in school in Scotland. And it was a month away from your parents. It's unbelievable. It's such an exciting thing. And I met this guy who, let's see, it was the first time I'd met somebody who really didn't give a damn about what anyone thought of him, or particularly what authority figures thought. I was always quite kind of safe and do things the proper way. And I met this guy, and we became friends instantly. And we wrote, the first song I wrote was about this, was about how awful the teachers were, and this thing. And he kind of contributed a bit, but I had the guitar and I sang it, and he would just clown around, and it got an amazing reception from the 50 or so kids that were there. Even some of the teachers liked it. And so that kind of, writing songs it doesn't have to be this deep stuff that Paul Simon was doing. It can be just for fun. And yeah, that probably set me off. I'll shut up now and give you a chance to talk.
It's okay. No, I love hearing this stuff. So as you progressed, as you got older, was it pretty easy to find gigs then? through the area?
No, no, not at all. Pretty much, it hasn't changed a lot in that it's not that easy to find gigs doing your own stuff. And it was the same then. My roommate, when I went to university, my roommate instantly got into a band, but it was playing covers and country stuff in a pub on a Friday night, doing requests and so on. And I never really wanted to do that. I just wanted to play strange stuff or my own stuff. So it was quite hard finding people to play with. Then I did meet someone who was a much, much better songwriter than me. I mean, almost, I still think of him as almost Paul McCartney level. He was one of these people who could just sit down and pick up an instrument, and you give him a word or two and he'll just make a song and it'll be quite beautiful. So I met this guy and he was putting together a band. So he let me, I joined the band as kind of rhythm guitar, and he encouraged me to write songs for the band as well. And he was very serious about it. And it was a 6-piece band that rehearsed twice a week for a year, did one gig and broke up. But it was a good learning experience. I discovered how you organize a rehearsal, how you he could arrange harmonies, which I didn't know anything about. And so we had a lot of fun, although we just did this one gig, and then he decided he was going to London to seek his fortune, and just left the rest of us like that. But that was a good experience, but it kind of made the whole thing of being in a band and being successful seem impossibly difficult. I thought, if someone as good as him can't become a famous rock star, then what chance is there for me? So I kind of shelved it for quite a few years. I would still play the guitar and still make up the odd song, but I didn't have any ambitions about it for quite a few years. Yeah.
So can I ask, what were you doing those few years?
Well, for quite a lot of it, I was teaching English to foreign students, teaching English as a foreign language.
Oh, okay.
I started in Spain, and then in Egypt, and back in the UK at university level, and then then to Germany, and then back to Egypt, and then back to the UK. So it kind of dotted about quite a lot. There's a period when I never lived anywhere longer than 6 months. So I would go off and do something else. At one point, I decided to leave teaching and get into the caring professions, and I worked in a therapeutic residential community for people with a diagnosis of psychopath or personality disorder. So, and that was an intense period. But and again, in a lot of these situations, being able to play guitar and make up songs was quite handy. So when I was teaching, I would make up songs that would teach points of language or points of grammar. And even in that therapeutic community, you could put on a cabaret, get all the patients or residents, as we called them, to do a little act and so on. So it was always useful, but at that time it wasn't about kind of expressing me or being trying to draw attention to myself. That all came later when I was far too old for it to be commercially viable.
I know when you said working in therapeutic sessions, did it seem to help the patients hearing the music?
Not so much hearing it. It was just that it was a point to talk about. It was a chat point. I wasn't a therapist as such. My role in this residential community, there were doctors and nurses and psychologists, most of whom actually lived in this place with the residents, or they would be there for almost all day. But there was this extra, they would take on 6 to 10 people every year whose job essentially was to be an ordinary person. Your job was just to go in there and relate to these people who had usually, in most cases, they'd been through the whole range of psychiatric and police interventions and hadn't really, none of that had helped. But you found that if you put them in a situation where they're looking after each other and taking decisions that actually affect the whole community, suddenly these people that have been condemned as being useless and feckless, you found they actually had a lot of depth and a lot of intelligence. I can just see a lovely little cat behind you.
Oh, thank you. Yes, that's Sophia. Yep, that's my baby.
Yeah. So yeah, these people can have you found depths within these people. I'm going way off topic here, but in terms of being able to play guitar and sing a song, it was just something that you could do socially, that they could sit around and sing along or chat, and they weren't worrying about therapists writing down what they're saying or any of this stuff. Yeah.
So did you find that they did enjoy it then?
Yeah. And twice we put on a cabaret for everyone, where they would, I just helped them writing sketches, and if they needed music for the sketch, I would do the music, but they all put on this show, and I think they surprised themselves with how good it could be. So that was a very intense year, and then I went back to teaching and went to Germany and went to Egypt again, and then I'd met my wife, but then we settled in Manchester. And that's right, yeah, what happened in that period was, while I was in Egypt, somebody sent me a copy of a music paper, the Melody Maker, the British music paper. And in the Melody Maker, there was an advert for this thing called a Porta Studio. And I thought, what's that? It was the first 4-track home recording thing that worked on cassettes, but for the first time you could overdub. You could record yourself and overdub harmonies or overdub guitar or bass and so on. And I thought, I must have one of these. And actually, I probably unfairly pressured my wife to, let's leave Egypt and get back to Britain so I can get one of these. So we settled in Manchester, and within a few months, I'd got one of these Porta Studios secondhand and got a guitar and a bass and a drum machine. And that's really when it began that I wanted to create my own stuff. And listening back to it, it sounds terrible now, but it was really exciting at the time to be able to do this.
Yeah, I noticed you have quite a few albums out. In 2019, your last one, 10 Objects. I listened to it. I thought it was wonderful, your music.
That's kind of you.
But are you planning on releasing anything else? Or I'm not sure with COVID and everything, if that kind of put a damper on some things.
It did for a while, but it's during COVID. I started doing quite a few kind of online Zoom type things, and a lot of my songwriter friends got into it much more than I did. They would do it weekly or even two or three times a week, and used to, every day you get notification that so and so is playing at 7 o'clock, so and so is playing at 8 o'clock, and I never really enjoyed it that much. But occasionally I would be invited to do a spot, and I would do it. But actually, what I discovered that I could do and enjoy more was to just record myself at home and make a little video and put that on, because that way, if I made a hash of it, I could just do it again before I made it public. Sometimes with some of those online concerts, you would do them and you think you're playing okay and it sounds all right, but when the video comes out, it's all distorted because of some software glitch or so on. And so I preferred to have my own control, and I did this series called the Twilight Show, which was basically me singing very quietly with a quiet guitar and dark room and a blue tinge on it, and playing quiet songs. And I like that. I'll keep doing that because it's quite a nice way to have a specific type of song that way. But now that we're able to get out and about, I've been working with my band again, and we've been in a studio not far from here and recording a new album, which is much more rocky and energetic than anything we've done before. It's definitely, it's not one of these, you know, aging musician introspective death albums. It's you know, it's quite upbeat and noisy for us. So that should be finished in, I don't know, maybe May or June, I would hope.
Oh, okay.
No, sorry. Am I saying May or June? I mean September.
Oh, okay.
I mean, we'll finish recording it in May or June, but there's all the preparatory work to do. You know.
So have you got the title for the album yet, or?
No, I haven't got a title yet. No, that's usually the last thing I think of it. It's quite often one of the songs stands out. Like in 10 Objects, I kind of knew that the song called 10 Objects would be the most important thing on it. At the moment, I don't have that feeling for this one. I don't know what it will be.
Okay. So when you're kind of sitting down and you're writing out your music, do you just write about anything, or are you looking for anything specific?
There are two ways that I tend to, that songs come in two different ways. One is I'm walking or driving, and I just open my mouth to sing, and something new emerges. And I think some of my best songs come that way. There's one on 10 Objects called it's the first song. It's the first song. It's a sort of gentle country song. I can't even remember what it's called. But I had been substituting for a friend in a punk cabaret band, and I'd been at a rehearsal for that because they wanted a guitarist, and it was just horrendously noisy. These people really, really enjoyed turning everything up to 11 and making a racket. And I was driving home from that, and for some reason, this very gentle country song just came out. makes sense to me. That's it. Yeah. So that's one way. They quite often, if I can remember them until I get home, they're usually quite good that way. The other way that things happen is I go through periods of maybe a few months when I get up in the morning and fill a notebook with, fill a few pages of a notebook with just random stuff. So it's not like trying to write a song, but just look out the window or look into myself and see what comes out and just write it down and don't look at it. It was a practice that someone showed me years ago. And I was tend to do that, and then I would get bored with it after a few months. And I would look at it and I'd think, that's awful. And then in a couple of years' time, maybe I've tried it again and I've thought, that's terrible. And then I look at the stuff I did 2 years ago, I think, that's better. And so I've now got a file on my computer here called Idea Catcher. And it's got about 90 bits of verses and songs and stuff like that. And so quite often, I find it quite easy to make up music, but difficult to make up words. So quite often I'll have an idea for some music and I'll just go and look in that file and see if there's anything lyric-wise that might go with that. And if there is, then I'll write some more to go with it. So that's the two way. I never actually sit down and think I'm going to write a song. I don't think I've done that for years, not on my own, with friends sometimes.
So are you going to be doing any touring or anything, or any gigs presently?
Just have one lined up in Edinburgh with the band in May. We don't really tour because we all have jobs, or some of them have jobs. And so our percussionist or drummer, she's in about 6 different bands. So it's quite, you know, the idea of going on a tour doesn't really work with it. You know, you can't, when your people are like that. I have that's Susie, my drummer percussionist. Fiona, who is the other guitarist in the band, she has her own band as well, in which I play bass. So neither of my band doesn't tour, her band doesn't tour, but we play the same gigs quite often. And the other member of the band, James, the bassist, has a full-time job, so he doesn't want to tour. So touring is one of these things that when I was young, I thought I'd love to do that. I'm not so sure now.
So how did you and your band get together?
I'd been through, I'd had 2 or 3 different bands in Edinburgh when I came, just through meeting people and word of mouth and let's try something. And there was a guy called Darren Thornbury, who was, I can't remember if he's Canadian or American, I think he's American. And he lived in Edinburgh and he had a really good band. And James, my current bass player, was in that band as bass player. And Darren then said he was going back to the States. And I thought, great, I can pounce here, I can poach his band. So I tried, but I got James, I didn't get anyone else. So James and I then looked around for friends, and we met. I knew of Fiona, I'd seen her in other bands. So there was 3 of us. And one night we were playing in Leith, and another friend said, oh, this is Susie, she plays percussion. And I don't know, there's a sort of thing that happens in a lot of these music pubs in Edinburgh where somebody calls themselves a percussionist. What they mean is they have a cajon, you know, one of these boxes that you sit on, and they can thump it in a way which is sometimes rhythmical and sometimes not. And so when they said, oh, she's a percussionist, I thought, yeah, okay. But I thought, well, I said, do you want to join us just for one? And she came up and she had this djembe, and yeah, okay, fine. But she's actually pretty good. But it was only when I got talking to her later I discovered she's a trained classical orchestral percussionist, as well as a drummer, as well as hand percussion.
Oh, wow.
As well as guitar, as well as mandolin. So it's no wonder that she's in so many bands, because she's a really versatile musician.
Yeah. So that's how you guys kind of hooked up.
Yeah, yeah.
So do you, not trying to put you on the spot, but do you have any stories or anything that you could kind of tell from your life, just in general, either with music or with something?
I've done the first thing comes to mind is it's almost an embarrassment, but in the same way, it's quite a nice story. And I've been trying for a long time to organize some gigs in the Highlands of Scotland, the Highlands and the Islands. And there's an organization here that tries to help musicians and theatre companies and so on get gigs in these far-flung places. And I'd been speaking to them for ages and nothing was really happening. And I went to did a conference. I went along to the conference all full of enthusiasm, and basically the message was, if you're not famous, we can't we can't risk it. And I can understand it from their point of view. They've got to pay for a hall, and if nobody's heard of you, you can't guarantee that people will come and pay money. I can quite understand it, but I was a bit and suddenly there's a tiny island called Coll, just off the west coast of Scotland. And I think it has about less than 100 inhabitants, but quite a lot of tourists. And I got a gig there. Wow, this is fantastic. I was so excited to do it. And my wife and I went for the weekend. That got there, discovered that they had done quite a lot of publicity. There were posters up and so on. Posters in the one shop, the one pub. I mean, it was that small. But anyway, the people that were organising it were incredibly friendly, and they gave us a little tour of the island. There was a big but. She said, I didn't know it when we booked the gig, but tonight is the 50th wedding anniversary of one of the people that lives in the town that knows everybody. And they're having an anniversary party tonight. So don't expect a big audience. I thought, okay. I'm really sorry. I didn't know when we booked you. So we got down to the venue, and there was the woman who organized it. There was my wife. There was me, and there's one other person. And so it sounds sad, but the weekend was just so beautiful because we got to see this island way of life that and we got shown around the island by the hosts, who were absolutely lovely. And I came away thinking, I don't mind actually. But it's the hazard of doing gigs in very small places. If somebody has a 50th wedding anniversary the same night, forget it.
So, last question. What advice would you give to someone who wants to go into music? What would you say to them?
Nowadays, the opposite of Yeah, I would no. Don't give up the day job. Have a source of income, because one, you probably won't make any money from music until you are drastically famous. If you don't become drastically famous, it's very hard to make any real money. And the whole independent music scene gives you a platform that you would never have had. Like, nobody, I would never have ever been heard if it wasn't for the internet. But now I can make videos, I can do online concerts, I can promote albums, all because of social media and the internet. The only thing that you can't do very easily with that is make money. So if you have a source of money and it doesn't exhaust you, then do it. And then make your music. There's a hero of mine whose picture's up there behind me. There's a guy called Robert Fripp, and he's a guitarist in a group called King Crimson. And he was asked the same question, and he said, if you want to make music, do something useful, like be a plumber. his angle on it is that if your living depends on the music, then quite often your living will determine the kind of music you can make. If you make a successful record, then there'll be tremendous pressure on you to repeat that and repeat it and repeat it, and not to do what you actually want to do. So yeah, and that if I had any advice, make a living and do the kind of music you want to do.
Oh, thank you, Norman. Thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Tell me a bit more about you.